Antibes is a walled town abutting against the waves of the Mediterranean Sea along the Côte d'Azur in the south of France, roughly halfway between the cities of Cannes and Nice. It has not suffered the overdevelopment that has blighted some of its neighbours. Graham Greene lived here for over 20 years and described it as the only place on the Riviera to have preserved its soul. The original coastline was very different in the past, where the shore was protected by a series of islands, shown dark brown on this map, and the white areas where the town expanded over the years to form the present city. The red circle defines the original Roman town. The origins of the town go back to the early Iron Age, traces of which have been found in the area of the castle and cathedral. The Phoenicians were a maritime nation who traded along the North Mediterranean from Greece and Rome and founded Massilia, now Marseille, and from where Antibes was founded. They became Greek colonies in time. The blue squares on this map shows where finds dating between the 7th and 5th centuries BC were excavated, and the red squares, which spread further inland, show finds from the 4th century to the 1st century BC. The dotted blue line indicates an earlier coastline. This map shows sites dating from the 1st century BC to the 7th century AD. The red semicircle to the lower left hand indicates where the Roman theatre was located, and the nearby yellow oval was where there was an amphitheatre. From here, further to the right and above it, in the yellow rectangle was where it was believed the Romans had their forum. This map shows the shoreline as it exists today. The blue representing the sea, the beige the older coastline, and the white where landfill took place over the centuries. The purple blobs are where the Greeks and Romans deposited underwater refuse tips, shipwreck sites, etc., and was a rich source of relics from the past. In the reconstruction of the harbour in the 1970s, these were removed. On a more sinister note, this map shows, with purple stars, the necropoli or burial sites around the town and the hinterland, again a rich source of memorabilia and knowledge. The red circle indicates the position of the old Roman town. Early in the 2nd century BC, the Ligurian, Deciates and Oxybian tribes launched repeated attacks on the town, and the Greeks of Marseille appealed to the Romans for help. Eventually, it became a Roman settlement, shown in orange on this map. The Greeks called the town Antipes, which means the facing city, as it faced towards the Greek town of Nicaea, now known as Nice, which was originally occupied by the Etruscans, so essentially the town was keeping an eye on a rival trading nation. The Greek town of Antibes dates from the 4th century BC and was basically a trading post along the Mediterranean. The harbour is modern, originally designed by the engineer Vauban. It was extensively developed in the 1970s and can accommodate large passenger cruisers and a flotilla of glamorous yachts for the well-to-do. Quel ciel te garde, quel vol, tout bas
puisque j'ignore en somme le nom dont on te nomme, ma lèvre dit toi, toi c'est mon rêve, c'est
We set off from Dublin on Tuesday the 4th of October and arrived in Nice airport in the early afternoon. We took the bus to Antibes, a journey of less than half an hour. After settling in, I began to explore the town and took this panned view, facing northwards towards the old town, clearly showing its fortifications, its castles, cathedral and towers, while the sea lapped peacefully against the walls and the rocks beneath. The maritime Alps can be seen in the distant background.
toi que j'aime.
This is Port de l'Orme, or the Elm Gateway, and is one of the early fortified towers sitting on Roman foundations. Originally, the gate was much wider, but was made narrower to be more easily defended. The whole construction is part of the medieval ramparts along which 6 towers still stand, including the Tourniquet Tower south of the Elm Gateway. The construction of the town hall in 1828 led to the disappearance of the Blanchard Tower. The road that leads down to the sea is Rue de l'Orme. Can you imagine our delight when Pam and Michael chose lodgings here for our memorable stay in Antibes? I visited Fort Carré, set on a hilltop north of the harbour, which overlooked the entrance. It was a lovely, calm, but slightly overcast day as I watched this ship peacefully glide through the harbour entrance. I noticed the unusual rounded prow, a little reminiscent, I thought, of a submarine, as the ship glided past me in the distance. The purpose of the fort was to overlook the harbour and defend the city. Now the ships entering and leaving are no longer a threat, but owned by the wealthy seeking refuge in the well-sheltered water of the harbour. Being a maritime city, one is never far from the sea and its peaceful surging. Every day I walked along the shore, watching ships come and go. Rue de Bateau, or Ship Street, and Rue des Arcots lead to the sea, and Port Vauban, and amongst the fine ships we found Molly Malone. There is also the pleasure side of the sea, the bathing places, the happy throngs, and across the bay the fine villas where the wealthy live a life of luxury in astounding beauty. The 2 towers that stand proudly against the skyline are known as the Saracen Towers and date back to the 11th and 12th centuries. They look very similar to what was constructed in the neighbouring country of Italy, especially in Bologna, where 2 surviving such towers have become a special feature of the town and adorn ceramic ware for sale to the tourists. The Antibes Saracen Towers play the same role as lookout platforms for the greatly feared invasions that ravaged Europe at the time. The tower next to the cathedral is 40 metres high and houses the cathedral's bells. The other forms part of the Grimaldi Castle, now the Picasso Museum. The general concept of the town of Antibes will show the 2 towers which have become the subject of artists over the years, especially by Paul Signac. As well as my walks around the shoreline, I also walked around the town itself. It is a lovely town, providing all that a tourist would want in terms of places to sit in the shade and enjoy the town pass by. There are countless restaurants and colourful shops to catch the eye and invite you in if you were so inclined. It is a busy and friendly town, with everyone offering you a bonjour, monsieur, but there was never pressure on me to buy. I was a visitor sharing their wonderful world. As an architect, fine buildings and streets caught my eye, and as I rounded one corner to find another item of interest, the streets were immaculately clean and inviting. There were monuments and plaques everywhere, but I have kept these to the end of the film. There were many slender mademoiselles and madams walking charming little dogs, often adorned with little coats and trinklets. The men sat in the shade over black coffees, whispering together about politics and daily events. It was a vibrant and living town and a most pleasurable experience. In the older part of the town, the medieval streets were narrow, and many had beautiful fan motif cobblestones that glistened when it rained or caught with the sun. Sounds are different in a small, narrow street, more friendly, more amplified. Usually cars or delivery vans were permitted only during early morning, so the streets were people-friendly and colourful. Private houses were often bedecked with flowers or draped with creepers, creating lovely smells, especially after a shower. Ornate lanterns were carried on the buildings themselves, and at night time the gaily coloured shops vied with each other for attention. On hot summer days the streets offered welcome shade. Not all these scenes are of the narrow medieval streets, but sometimes I was limited to portrait views of hotels, offices and wealthy residences. Antibes is famous for its colourful marketplaces, and just outside Port de l'Orme was Cours Messina, a most delightful and vibrant place. In the mornings it was a busy shopping street, all in an ornate arcade, away from the elements and from the intense sun. Stalls with every kind of condiment, vegetables, meat and fruit were set out colourfully, and people chatted happily while they did their morning shopping. In the afternoon the food stalls were replaced with craft exhibits for every taste, from delicate painted figurines to bronze gods. Again there was a final metamorphosis in the late afternoon, when the shops and restaurants poured out into the pleasant warmth of a Mediterranean evening where one could sample every kind of cuisine. Also there was a market held in Rue de la République, selling everything imaginable from colourful bottle stoppers to metal cars. When it comes to sweet things to tempt the palate, Antibes truly excelled. Trays of colourful cakes, exotic fruits and delicate tarts made it very difficult to pass by. Even looking at them now is mouth-watering and brings back some happy memories. Lording it over the ramparts of a medieval structure, the old castle was rebuilt in the 16th century for the Grimaldi family and is known as Chateau Grimaldi, but still retained its 12th century Romanesque tower. It is a beautiful, light, cool space and welcoming, with its original hexagonal terracotta floor tiles. On the upper terrace is a fine display of bronze statues of ladies standing on the battlements by Germain Richer, which I photographed both from the road beneath and on the terrace. Picasso continued to donate paintings to the museum after he left, but the great bulk of the work belongs to this one period. Painting during the war years, with the lack of pigments and materials, he often used odd pieces of wood instead of canvas and boat paint instead of oils, but this prolific artist would not be denied his art. The museum offers visitors to view lesser-known works that can only be seen here. It fell into some disrepair, and in 1946 Picasso was offered this dusty old building, which was already a museum, as his studio. Several prolific months followed before he moved to Vallauris, leaving all his Antibes paintings in what is now Musée Picasso. Unfortunately, one was not permitted to photograph his paintings or those of the many other artists and sculptors on exhibit. I had to content myself in the Picasso shop photographing cushion covers and ceramic plate copies for sale. The museum is a refreshing experience. The area occupied by Chateau Grimaldi and Antibes Cathedral is considered to be the old part of the town in terms of habitation, going back to the early Iron Age. Its elevated position on the Jurassic Dolomite limestone made it the choice of the early Phoenicians and later the Greeks and Romans. Its full name is Cathédrale Notre-Dame de la Patrie d'Antibes and is a Roman Catholic church and is also a French national monument. Beneath the cathedral was a pagan temple going back to Roman times. It is said that St. Paul was arrested here when on a journey to Spain in 63 AD. A new church was built dating from the 5th century AD. The remains of this can be seen in the Chapel of the Holy Spirit. The church was destroyed by the barbarians in 1124 and was rebuilt in the early 13th century. The plan has 3 naves and has undergone many transformations over the centuries. The current facade is in the Italian style from 1747, when rebuilt after a heavy bombardment. Some masterpieces from the Renaissance survive in the church. There is a crucifix dating from the 15th century in the choir. The transept chapel is a masterpiece painted by the Provençal artist Louis Bray in the 16th century. It represents the Virgin with rosary. The carved portal is by Jacques Dole from the beginning of the 18th century. The cathedral was formerly the seat of the bishops of Antibes, but later the bishops of Grasse. The seat was lost but restored after the French Revolution, and it was added by the Concordat of 1801 to the Diocese of Nice. A wooden effigy of the dead Christ from the 17th century was rescued from the sea in 1938 and placed on display in December 1988. The interior I found to be very calming and lovely experience. I always feel that the soul of a town or people is found in its archaeology. One can read about Iron Age artifacts being discovered or pottery found in a grave dating to Greek times, but to actually see them makes the experience real. We always visit the archaeological museums to help us to understand and have a greater sense of the past. Antibes has a fine, though small, museum, and it brought the past to life. The building itself that houses the museum is of historic interest and is a rounded structure set into the ramparts, not unlike Port de l'Orme, and not far away to the south, and is called the Bastion Saint-André. It was built by Vauban in 1698 and looks unchanged. Vauban, you may recall, also constructed the earlier harbour. Much of the archaeological material collected has been found in La Roche, in the harbour area, going back to the 6th century BC, and consists of a mix of local pottery and ceramics in the Greek tradition, an indication of the active commerce of the Phoenicians, a Greek community from Asia Minor, who settled in Marseille, which they called Massalia, in 600 BC. Archaeological findings are attested as early as the 16th century, but it wasn't until the middle of the last century that any serious attempt to uncover the community's past was undertaken, and this is still a work in progress. Unfortunately, I was not permitted to photograph the exhibits, and I gathered information and pictures from a book about the museum. A lot of material had inscriptions giving information about the artifact, its owner, and its date. Amphoria, which were containers of oil, wine, and fish conserves, were designed to be easily stored and stacked, as shown here in a reconstructed cross-section of a sea-going vessel of the day. When a suction dredger was being used in 1917 to desludge the port, vast quantities of coins, over 2,200 in all, were gathered, dating from 300 to 317 AD, probably constituting a levy of taxes or military pay. Fort Carré is located on the peninsula of Sainte-Roche, on a rock that rises 26 metres above sea level, 8 metres higher than Chateau Grimaldi, with a 360-degree panoramic view towards Antibes harbour and castle to the south, the maritime Alps to the west, and the city of Nice to the north, and of course the sea to the east. It was built on the orders of King Henry II of France in the second half of the 16th century and was designed by Vauban, the engineer who was also responsible for constructing the harbour in Antibes. The fort is basically square in plan with a circular core, hence the name Carré, which means square, but the four corners have been teased out dramatically to strengthen them. The weakest part of a defensive structure is a flat, vertical surface which can take the full impact of a cannonball, so by rounding a structure or angling it, the ball has less impact and is sent off centrifugally at a skew with less damage. A typical example in Dublin would be the Martello Tower, which presented an oval shape towards the line of attack, which was anticipated from the sea during the Napoleonic Wars. The fort was basically a lookout tower and a defensive site, as Antibes was the last French port before the border with Nice, which at the time was a threat to Antibes. The fort is in excellent preservation and now houses a museum showing how it was originally appointed and furnished. Alas, I never got to see the inside. The views from the top are stunning, and the fort is surrounded by 4 hectares of sylvan parkland. From Bastion Saint-André, I took this pan looking across the bay towards Cap d'Antibes. On the highest ground can be seen Antibes Lighthouse, with a very powerful beam that can be seen 70 kilometres out to sea, and beside it to the left is a communication mast, which is a little unsightly but no doubt necessary. At the base of the lighthouse is the little chapel of Garoupe, reached by a steep climb through wooded land by Chemin du Calvary, and it is to here that I am setting out. To the right is Plage de la Salie, a fine beach which is free, as many beaches along the Riviera have an entry charge or are in the ownership of exclusive hotels for the wealthy. The Chapelle de la Garoupe is a very simple little church with no fussy architectural detailing and has a strong sense of repose. Unfortunately, it was closed at the time of my visit. I walked around it and felt a great deal of composure in this peaceful setting. There were other related buildings attached, and there was a feeling of tranquility and peace about the place. I sat and pondered for a while and enjoyed the panoramic views across the bay to the cathedral and beyond to Nice. I can imagine this church bell ringing out, calling the faithful to pray. But it was also to hear that the citizens of Antibes took refuge in times of attack by the Saracens and prayed for deliverance. Around the church there is a small pathway along which are the Stations of the Cross, each with a painting enclosed in a latticed niche. On the way back to Antibes, I took the public road as I had come through a wooded hill to reach the church, and it was along here that many of the wealthy folk of Antibes lived, not only in splendid dwellings, but located in a most scenic setting. I admired many of the details. The south of France is famous for its beautiful ceramic work, and many of the buildings had some lovely panels.
Oh, je voudrais tant que tu te souviennes des jours heureux où nous étions amis.
France suffered greatly in both world wars, and each town and village had its losses. Everywhere one goes, one will find a plaque or a monument to those who fell, asking us to remember them. The large statue of the First World War soldier in front of Fort Carré was the most evocative in the town and the most imposing. Again, there are memorials to special events or the commemoration of some important personage or patron of the town. One does not need to wander far to come across one. As an architect, I was drawn to doors and archways and windows, and of course ornate balconies in either stone or wrought iron were a great attraction. Clumps of vegetation, overhanging flowers, a bluebird in a window, all had their appeal. One of the most imposing monuments of all was called Inspiration, and it looked like young people taking to flight like some exotic birds being liberated from earthly bondage. The dolphin fountain was also impressive. There were of course ornate knockers, skeletal figurines, marble birds and contorted steel.
tout doucement, sans faire de bruit. Et la mer efface sur le sable les pas des amants.
Most impressive of all, and now perhaps the most visited, is the squatting nomad, a Buddha-like figure of immense proportions, 8 meters high, designed by the Spanish sculptor Jaume Plensa from Barcelona. Instead of using bricks or stone for his monument, it is composed of letters of the alphabet welded together to form a hollow figure into which people can sit and contemplate. He says that letters enable us to construct thought. I'll leave you with this monument and hope you enjoyed my short film of Antibes, and thank you for watching.
Sans faire de bruit. Et la mer efface sur le sable les pas des amants.